I just wanted to thank everybody for coming here and give you the quick run of show so you know what to expect. So we're going to start in here with our esteemed guests, Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. They have a wonderful program for us. They have generously offered to allow for some questions, and at that point, what's going to happen is, look how shy and modest he is. I want everybody to meet. Can everybody give Dallas Harrod some props? He is the real brains in operation of the AP government program. I want you to know he just sits back there modestly, but he's the one who gets it all done. So he's the real power of this night, and I just don't let him hide in the corner. So can I also get my students to stand up? And by my students, I mean our students, Mr. Harrod and I. Can I get all the students to stand up? These are the reason we are here. These people are the most brilliant minds. They inspire me every day. And when we had this idea, they were the ones who said, let's make it happen. So these are the real movers and shakers in the room. So we're going to be distributing questions afterward. We're going to bring note cards so that you can write that out, and we can make sure to do it in a way that is safe and comfortable. My students know that I'm usually very protective of them, and what I have found over the years as a teacher is that sometimes you have a question you want to ask, but you're a little bit shy to ask it. So this is our way to be completely inclusive. If you write it on a name, on a little note card, then I'm the one who has to, take the hit being embarrassed and asking it. So we'll distribute questions on cards. If you ever have a question, you want to start writing it, just raise your hand. So let's practice that right now. What are you going to do if you want to ask a question? And then you're going to see just like rapid fire, note cards coming towards you. We got it? We're good? Okay. After we've asked our questions, we're going to go out into the commons. In the commons, they have some cool activities planned for us. We are going to sign a civility pledge, and you are going to have the opportunity, wait for it, to take a selfie with some of Bloomfield Hills' most esteemed elected officials. Oh, yeah. Taylor Swift, Beyonce, forget it, stand back. We have the real dignitaries in here. Should we see the students again? Those are the real dignitaries. Raise your hands again. In case anybody wants to have a picture with you, you're the real dignitaries. Okay, Mr. Harrod, do you want to introduce who's in the room?
So we just want to thank some of our distinguished guests for joining us from the State Board of Education, Ellen Lipton, from State Rep from District 56, Sharon McDonnell, County Treasurer Robert Wittenberg, the County Clerk Lisa Brown, looking at the township, our Township Supervisor Danny Walsh, former Andover student, correct? Our Township Treasurer Michael Shostak, our Township Trustee Valerie Murray, and Christopher Kolinsky. And then from the District of Bloomfield Hills, we have our Interim Superintendent Randy Lippa, Bloomfield Hills High School Principal Dan Hartley, school board members Paul Colin and Karen Noble.
Can we get all of you to stand up so that they can see where you are? And State Senator Jeremy Moss. These elected leaders have so generously offered to sit spread out at tables in the Commons so that you can be sitting intimately with them, having your deepest conversations about civility you've ever dreamed of having, and then they're going to do selfies with you. Don't tell me this night isn't going to be fabulous. Look at my workers over there. Darlings, you're off duty. Come sit down. Relax. Okay, one last thing I'd like to do before I hand over the mic is I have to tell you, I was coming in and I was thinking tonight, okay, wait, How can I possibly go through the long list of everybody who's helped me by bringing food, by doing the mics, by getting the lobby ready? And then I realized if anybody's ever listened to Mr. Rogers, he always tells you to look in the room for the helpers. What I see here is a room of helpers. So I'm wondering if you can all do me a huge favor. Because I can't personally thank everybody for being here, can you help me out? Can you look at the people in the immediate area? There's a reason we have name tags on. Use their name. Thank everybody for being here. It's pretty great that they came. And without further ado, let's talk about civility with Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson. Thank you so much.
Well, I first want to, of course, thank all of you for coming and for inviting us. I do also want to say to all the students here, I'm really impressed that you're here on a Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Rubbing shoulders with public officials and things like that. When I was your age, this is not where I would have been. I would have been doing something else tonight. So good for you guys coming out to be part of this. As I said, I'm Stephen Henderson, and this is Nolan Finley. For those of you who don't know us, we are two media fixtures here in Detroit, and we sit kind of on opposite poles of the political spectrum. I'm a liberal or a progressive or whatever term you would put on the left side of the political spectrum, and Nolan is a conservative. We started this whole thing talking about civility and kind of figuring out things between us about 15 years ago. When I was the editorial page editor of the Detroit Free Press, which of course is the liberal newspaper here in town. Nolan had already been the editorial page editor of the Detroit News for several years. And I came back to town, to Detroit from the East Coast for a while, and people looked at us and said, boy, I bet if we get the two of them together, they will fight. And they were right. They would put us together on television and radio and in public appearances and bring up any issue. We could have an argument about it, and a good argument, and a passionate argument. But while we were kind of busy doing that and learning more about each other, something kind of interesting happened. We started talking when we weren't on stage or on the air about other things other than politics. We started talking about who we were and other things that we were interested in and things that we had done. We found that when we weren't talking about politics, we actually had several things in common. He's from Kentucky. I spent the first 2 years of my career working in Kentucky. We both had the same job and really valued this idea of making good arguments and advocating for things and all kinds of stuff that we found to have in common. And lots of people were surprised by that. Some people were kind of angry about it, in fact. How dare you be friends with that guy? A lot of people would say, how can you even talk to him? He says these awful things. He says these crazy things. And his friends would say the same thing to me. If you think back to when this was about 2007, 2008, about the same time frame really that we're in now, right before a pretty important presidential election that people expected to be pretty contentious. The outcome of that election, of course, was that Barack Obama became the first African-American president here in the United States. A lot of people really excited about that. A lot of people were really disappointed by it. But if you fast forward from then to 8 years later, 2016, and think about the outcome of that presidential election when Donald Trump was elected president. It wasn't just that people were upset or happy. I mean, there was this incredible bitterness between the two. The thing I remember so distinct about that run-up between the election in 2016 and Thanksgiving that year, the number of people who wrote me or called or stopped me and said, I don't want to go to Thanksgiving dinner this year because I've got a relative there, an uncle, a brother, a cousin, who voted for the other person, and I don't want to have that argument. I don't want to talk to that person about that. If you fast forward from then to now, 7 years later, getting ready for another presidential election, are things better or are they worse? I think most of us feel like they've either stayed the same or gotten worse. And so over that time, that's 15, 16 years, Nolan and I have been arguing about all of this stuff, pretty steady, but we've been able to make it work other than in politics. We've been able to maintain a friendship, a very good friendship, a very important friendship, despite the fact that we don't agree on the things that are happening, but also as it seems that the rest of the country is kind of coming apart about these things. This idea that we can't talk to each other, that we don't want to talk to each other because we disagree. And that's where the Civility Project comes from. We started to think a few years ago, well, why does this work for us? What are we doing that makes it work? What are we doing that prevents us from saying, I don't want to talk to this person anymore. I don't want to deal with this person anymore because of the things that he believes. And we started to think about the kind of rules that we've developed over the last 15 or 16 years, the customs that we are kind of observing, and talking now to groups like this about how that has come to be, in the hope that more people can figure out ways to do it. As I said, we just got done with the Thanksgiving holiday. I still hear from people every year about holiday dinners and the difficulty that they have showing up because somebody there doesn't agree with their politics. It's not just that our politics are divided anymore, it's that we are divided as people. Our politics has infected even the most intimate and precious spaces in our lives and made us into this kind of tribal, in a political sense, society where we don't deal with each other. That's not working. It's preventing us from getting things done. It's dangerous. It's inciting all kinds of very ugly behavior. The goal of our project is to get people at least to be able to talk to each other, not to agree, not to decide that they don't stand for the things that they believe in, but to be able to say, I can do all of those things and still be able to talk to somebody who thinks differently. I can still maybe even be friends or have a relationship with somebody who I don't agree with.
Yeah, and again, I'll echo what Steve said. Thank you all for coming out tonight. It's a beautiful school. We are honored to be here, and we appreciate so many of you came out to hear us talk for a while about civility. I want to get to what we mean by civility. A lot of people say, well, civility means we all agree with one another. We're not here to try to get you to agree with each other on anything. Steve and I can't think of many things we agree on. We'll fight about anything and everything with rather intense passion. We can get after it with each other. So it's not trying to bring you together. It's not we're not trying to preach passivity or kindness or niceness or any of that kind of thing. No one would mistake either one of us for Mahatma Gandhi. We have strong opinions about things, and sometimes we express those opinions in a way that gets under people's skins. We can be blunt, and we can be a little short-tempered, can't we, Steve?
Sometimes.
That's not what it's all about. What it's all about is trying to convince people that you can disagree and not hate each other. You can come from different places politically, culturally, racially, and not hate one another. And what this project is all about is trying to bring down the hate, because we believe there is way too much hate in our country today, and that hatred is manifesting itself in some ugly ways throughout our communities, and it's keeping us from progressing in the way we ought to progress as a people and as a community. And it is possible. I mean, Steve and I are living proof that it is possible to hold completely different positions on almost every issue and not hate one another and still have affection for each other, but more importantly, find value in each other. And that's what the Civility Project is all about. We're trying, we say here that, we believe all good people come to their opinions in the same way. They take the facts, the data that are available, they run them through the filters of their own experiences, their own values, and they come up with an opinion. And if it's different than mine, if it's different than yours, doesn't mean they're evil, doesn't mean they're out to harm you in any way, doesn't make them sinister. They've just learned different lives, they've just lived different lives and hold different values. And the key to civility, the key to maintaining a respectful relationship and getting to the point where you can learn from each other is to gain some sort of understanding about what those experiences and values are. I always start out by telling a story of a few years ago. Steve and I were up on Mackinac Island for the Republican State Policy Convention. Clearly it was a place where Steve was far less comfortable than I was.
Far less popular.
Stood out a little. But we were up there for a couple of days covering that. And we were out after one of the day's session. We dropped downtown for a drink at one of the local bars, and it was packed with Republicans and conservative people. And Steve and I sitting there talking. We were getting some looks. But I got up and walked across the floor at one point, headed to the restroom. And these two ladies, they ran a conservative website. I knew them, but they pounced on me. And I don't get pounced on by ladies in bars very often, but so it was, that was unusual. But they were very agitated, and they said, "Is that Stephen Henderson?" I said, "Well, yeah." He said, "Are you friends with him? How could you be friends with him? He is so awful. We just hate him." And the intensity of that statement sort of stopped me. And I said, "You hate him?" I said, "Do you know him?" "Well, no, we don't know him." "Have you ever talked to him?" "No, we've never talked to him." I said, "Well, do me a favor. My seat's open. Go over there and sit next to him. Believe me, he'll talk to you. He'd talk to anybody. Just talk to him for a little bit." And to their credit, they did. And to Steve's credit, he was very welcoming. And, I sort of went to another part of the bar and watched here now and then, look over there. And they were very actively engaged, but not in an angry way. I thought, this could go either way when I sent them over there. But, and this just went on and on and on. I finally said, "Well, I'm going to rescue Steve." And I went over there and sort of gently led them in a way. And as we're walking back across the bar, I said, "Well, what do you think? How'd it go?" And the lady said, "Oh my, he's so wonderful. We just love him." And I thought to myself, nothing changed in the hour or so that they were together. Nothing changed about Steve. Nothing changed about them. They still held the same opinions. They still disagreed. But what had happened is they had taken the time to get to know each other and to try to understand each other a little bit and to recognize that they each held their opinions for reasons other than, "Oh gosh, you're just an awful person and somebody must have dropped you on your head when you were a baby." they learn something about each other. And that's what this project's all about. We don't want you to agree. We just want you to take the time to understand each other and to find the value in having a relationship across the many divides in our country today.
Yeah. One of the first questions we get is, okay, so that sounds great, but how do you do it? How do you actually make that work? Especially, in times when it seems that the things that divide us are much more intense and much more important than they have been in recent years. So we've really come up with 4 pillars of the project that we think have guided what we have learned to do over the last 15 or 16 years, and that we think everyone else can use to try to figure out how to have better relationships with people you disagree with. The story that Nolan just told about this interaction on Mackinac Island is an example of the first pillar, and that is to drop the assumptions that we have about each other. Very frequently, I think, in our culture right now, we meet somebody, we find something out about them that is maybe different from what we know, and we jump to all kinds of conclusions about what that means. Liberals meet conservatives and assume all kinds of things about them, and vice versa. The first thing we ask people to do in the Civility Project is to step away from that. Don't make assumptions about who people are and what they believe, but more importantly, why they believe it. Take the time to actually talk to them, to actually sit down, have a conversation about the things that they believe and where they get them. Why do they consider themselves a conservative or a liberal? What are the things that they experienced that led them to believe that that's the best way to solve problems? It really is about disarming this kind of hair trigger response that we have, I think, been conditioned by a lot of things in our culture right now to things that are unfamiliar or that seem like they're in opposition to us. And so actually, we used to, when we started the Civility Project, that was how we asked people to start the sessions. Sit down and get to know each other before you have a discussion about politics or something else that divides you. And actually, Nolan and I did this ourselves about 6 years ago. We'd already been friends for about a decade and knew a lot about each other and had worked together and done other things together for a long time. But in 2017, the NPR program called StoryCorps came to Detroit. And if you don't know what that is, it's an effort by that public radio network to collect American stories about relationships. They travel the country and set up a little Winnebago somewhere and ask people to come down with somebody who's close to them to talk about the relationship they have, why they have that relationship, how it developed, how they maintain it, and why it is important to them. Most people, when they think about StoryCorps, they think about taking a spouse or a family member and talking about their relationship. The first thing I thought when StoryCorps came was, I'm taking Nolan with me. We're going to go down there and do this. And I told him in the car, I don't want us to go down there and do what we normally do, which is to go and have an argument about politics. I don't want to talk about the things that we disagree on. I want us to tell each other our stories. I want you to sit and tell me what makes Nolan Finley a conservative. What are the things you experienced? What are the things you learned that lead you to believe that that is the best way to solve our problems? And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to tell you what makes me a liberal or a progressive or whatever label you want to put on it. So we went down to this little Winnebago that they had set up on the front lawn of the Detroit Institute of Arts and sat in there for an hour across a table with a microphone between us and told each other those stories. And like I said, we'd known each other for a decade already. We'd worked together for a decade. We learned things in that hour that neither of us had heard before about the other, all kinds of detail about our lives and our experiences that just hadn't come up before. We heard things from the other that we recognized, right? Things we recognized in ourselves, in our own stories, in each other, things we wouldn't have known and wouldn't have had occasion to talk about before. And I think we came out of that little Winnebago really changed in terms of the way that we work together. I think if you were to look at the arguments we had before that conversation and look at the arguments that we have after, you would see a real difference. It's not a difference in what we think or how devoted either of us is to the things that we think, but I think there's a respect for where it comes from and why the other person thinks those things that's really evident, that wasn't evident before. And I think all the time about what might have happened if we had started there. Instead of starting out on television or on radio having fights and arguing about things, what if we had started out by having that conversation? How different would that first 10 years of us working together have been? And so that's what we kind of use as the starting point in this conversation about civility now. Drop the assumptions, have a conversation that leads you to an understanding of the other person before you get into the things that divide you.
And that challenges you to work a little harder, because it's easy to allow assumptions to fill the gaps in information. And we ask people to go in assuming nothing about the person across the table, other than that, as we said, they're decent people who have lived their own lives and formed their own values. And respect is the key to holding a civil conversation. And we find that process of getting people to ask questions of each other rather than just sit and bang heads with each other leads to an openness, a little more honesty, a little more forthrightness in the conversation, but also getting to the point where you feel more comfortable discussing difficult issues and tougher issues. And as Steve said, it is harder. Once you build that sort of understanding and respect, it is harder to be uncivil and to be confrontational in your discussions. And so that dropping the assumptions, that's the first step here, coming in. But we also ask people to set, once they've decided they want to have a conversation across the divides or to build relationships or mend relationships with people who hold strong disagreements with, is to set honest goals for the conversation you're about to have. And there's really only one honest goal, and that's to learn something from the other person. And too often we approach these conversations in a way where our goal is to convert the other person, to show them we are so superior in our understanding of an issue that we're just going to bowl you over. And we have another thing we say in the project is a conversation is not a competition, and we're not out to convert. I would have lost my mind years ago if my goal was to convert Steve to my position. And if he were to suddenly wake up one day and call me and say, "Oh man, I agree with you 100%. You were right," I probably would just say, "I'm ready to go, Lord, take me now," because it's not going to happen. I'm not going to convert Steve to my way of thinking, nor him but we still find value in the conversations, and that the value is we can sharpen our own opinions, we can learn something perhaps we didn't know, and on the very rare occasion we might find that we've shifted a little in our viewpoints because we've had this honest back and forth. And one of the key, one of the key steps to getting to that point where you can have that meaningful back and forth is to, check your self-righteousness at the door. Check your smugness at the door. We always get this question every single civility session. How do you talk to somebody who just won't accept the truth, who denies the facts? Because we're all so convinced that we hold the truth and hold the facts. I tell a story. I was with John Dingell, the late congressman, the longest serving congressman in U.S. history, in fact, and he was taking call after call after call from environmentalists. He had just introduced a bill that was favorable to the auto industry, his constituents, and the environmentalists were just on his back. And after a while of this, he hung up the phone and he put his hands on his head and said, "They think they're the only ones who talk to God." And we tend to think we're the only ones who talk to God, that we have the truth. You got to lose that and be open to hearing another person's viewpoint and at least harboring some self-doubt about your own convictions, and acknowledging that there's at least a possibility that you might be wrong. And if you honestly listen and engage with someone and get involved in the back and forth of a discussion without preaching and without judging the other person, you might get some value out of the conversation.
I mean, this is kind of the first point in the presentation where the influence of social media, I think, comes into the picture. And we got all these young folks here. I know that social media is generally a big part of your lives, and in a different way than it is for people my age. But and I love social media. And in fact, actually, if you want to see a real fight between me and Nolan, ask us about social media. This is one of the things we really disagree about. We will go 15 rounds up here about whether social media has any value at all. I think it does, but I do think that we've got real problems with it. And one of them is the culture that it encourages. You think about the way that people relate to each other on social media. The arguing and fighting that you see on social media, and the way that people approach that, this idea of winning the argument by humiliating the other person, showing them up as stupid or uninformed, and mocking them in a way for the things that they believe or the things that they say. Look, I think there's a time and place for that, and there's things about social media where that makes sense. But when we're talking about this kind of communication, being able to actually talk with somebody about something, we've got to be able to step away from those customs that are developing on social media. We got to be able to say, that's okay there, it doesn't work. It doesn't work here. And this idea of competitive conversation, winning and owning the other side is really dominant on social media right now. So those are the first two pillars.
Well, I just want to add, and people, we thought when, in our business, when social media first emerged, that it would be a way to connect people, connect the community, and create greater understanding amongst people. It's turned out to be to have fallen far short of that promise. It hasn't delivered on that potential. It may yet, but we find that people are empowered for some reason by social media to say some of the most vile things to each other, and to sort of promulgate hate. And one of the pieces of advice we offer, and I keep it taped onto my computer because I have been an impulsive person when it comes
occasionally
to these sort of exchanges. But we ask you to ask 3 questions before you hit the send button and put a post. Ask yourself, does this need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? Or I'm sorry, does it need to be said right now? And does it need to be said by me? Think before you press that send button about the consequences of your words.
Yeah. So those are the first two pillars, dropping assumptions and setting reasonable expectations for conversations. The third pillar, I think, is one of the most important, and that's listening. Once you do those first two things and decide to have an argument or a conversation with somebody, you actually do have to listen to the other person. And we use that word a little differently in the Civility Project than I think most of us are used to in our own lives. I think if most of us were asked, what does it mean to listen to somebody else, we'd say, well, when I stop talking and give that other person a chance to talk, that means I'm listening. But I think if we unpack that a little, most of us know that's not always the case. Just because we're not talking doesn't mean we're actually listening to what the other person is saying. I think we're talking here about a more invested form of listening than just not talking. Sometimes when I'm not talking and I'm letting someone else talk, I'm actually not listening so much to what they're saying as I am thinking about what I'm going to say as soon as they stop talking, right? What's the next thing I want to say? Or I'm judging what they're saying as they're saying it, and not really trying to understand where they're coming from. I actually have a couple tests for myself about whether I'm doing the kind of listening that we're talking about here. The first is when someone else is done talking, could I repeat back to them what they just said? Could I do it, maybe not word for word, but certainly in good faith and accurately and not mocking them? Be that person for 2 or 3 minutes and say, here's what I understand you to be saying. And I think when I'm really listening to somebody, I'm able to do that. I'm able to reflect back what they just said. And then the second test I have is whether I have questions for them about what they just said. I find that when I'm really listening to somebody, I am curious about what they just said. I am curious about where it comes from. Why do they think that? Maybe I heard something in what they said that I didn't quite catch all of, and I want to know more about. Maybe I heard something that I just don't understand, and I want to go back and talk more about it. The idea of responding to what somebody says, not with your own declaration, but a question about what they're saying, I think is A, a sign that you are listening, but B, it's a way of reframing the interaction with somebody. The disarming effects of this sort of interrogative form of speech, as opposed to the declarative form of speech, is an important part of civility. I'm showing that I'm actually curious about you and how you think and what you think. It pushes the conversation in a really different direction, and so that listening becomes this important tool for cooling off the conversation or the argument and keeping us from some of the uncivil speech and actions that we see so much of.
And then the last pillar of this project and of what we're trying to get across is to commit to the process. It's not going to work automatically the first time you sit down with someone and try to engage in a civil conversation despite your differences. It takes a long time and a lot of a commitment. You have to be intentional about it. You have to be thinking about it, and you have to practice it. And a good way, sort of we believe, to get to that point is to ask more questions in a conversation. Spend more time asking questions than you do sharing your own opinion. Make people feel comfortable. Make them understand and see that you're interested in what they think and why you think those things, and don't give up on it. And keep things some perspective about things as well. Steve and I, a month or so ago, went up to Lansing to do a civility session with a community group up there, and there was a young woman sitting up front, and she was taking notes, and as soon as we got done, she came up and said, "I've got a question. I want to talk to you all about my situation." And she said she was newly married, and she said her husband and his father couldn't be in the same room together because their political differences were so severe. They had got to the point of disowning each other. They wouldn't see each other. They wouldn't communicate at all because one felt one way about politics and one felt the other. And this young woman says, "I want to have a family. I want to have children, but I don't want them to grow up in an environment where their father and their grandfather, whom she said, I love them both, but they hate each other." She didn't want her children to grow up that way or in that environment. And, it just occurred to us that you got to put these things in perspective. Neither one of those two men were going to change the world by converting the other one to their viewpoint. They had almost no chance of deciding what direction the country was going to go in or what policy was going to be prevail. And it's important to keep some perspective on that. This is not what's important in life. What's important in life is developing the sort of relationships that will carry you through the difficult times. And you got to remember, we've had that situation in my own family after the 2016 election where one of my cousins who felt very strongly one way and much of the rest of the family felt strongly the other, and she cut everybody off. She said, "I'm not talking to you folks anymore. I'm not engaging with you all anymore because you voted differently than I did, and you believe the country should take a different path than I believe." And I called her and I said, "Vicki, these are the people who are your family. They're the ones who are going to be there in those dark moments. They're the ones you're going to call when things go off the tracks for you. And you're not going to care at that point what their politics are." And we just ask people to keep that in perspective. It's important to engage. It's important to be involved civically, but it's also important to not let your beliefs destroy your relationships with the people who love you and whom you love, because that's what's going to matter. And if we can sum up this project in any way, it would be that we're trying to tamp down the hate that has become so prevalent in this country, and we're trying to convince people that they don't have to hate each other because they disagree. You can have a productive relationship. I believe Steve and I are proof of that, and still without compromising your beliefs or your opinions or without agreeing with each other.
Yeah, that idea of the commitment to the interaction. When Nolan and I first started appearing in places and having these kind of political arguments, it was our job to go do it, and we didn't have a choice about being there, and so we kept coming back over and over and over. But 15, 16 years later, I think there's a more conscious investment from both of us in the idea of coming back. I don't think either of us has ever gotten up from a table after an argument and said, "That's it, I'm done with this guy, I can't stand this, I'm not going to have this kind of conversation anymore with this person." I think saying that to ourselves and saying that the value we draw out of the interaction with the other person is worth more than any one disagreement or argument that we have is an important place to reach. And you can't do that with just one one interaction. You have to do that over time. And we were talking earlier about families. Nolan was just talking about his family. This is where that kind of dynamic really, really matters. So many of us right now, I think, are having real trouble inside our families with the influence of political difference. People who think differently, in terms of politics, are pulling away from people they're related to because of that. That investment, though, is the whole idea of family. That you don't walk away, that you never kind of say, I'm done with that. You make that choice as a way of preserving that space and that relationship. I think what we're saying is that you can do that in many different spaces, and over time, it becomes something that you just that just kind of comes natural. I mean, Nolan and I can talk about anything, we can argue about anything, we can have a fight about just about anything, and neither of us walks away permanently from it because of that. And that's really one of the values of this, is being able to have somebody that you can talk to about anything and have a disagreement about anything and not fear that that disagreement is damaging the relationship, damaging your ability to do that, damaging the willingness to be in that space. We've got to get more of our folks in this country into that space to be able to do that, not just because it feels good and it's quote unquote the right thing to do, but because we've got to get past some of these differences to get some of the things done that need to be done in our country.
And that's key. We don't want you to avoid tough conversations or avoid each other because you know the conversation is going to lead to a disagreement. Almost 3/4 of the people in this country say they never talk about politics with someone who holds different political beliefs than them. That's not productive. We want you to engage, not avoid, but engage productively and engage respectfully and civilly, because in the end, we've got to be one people. And I guess, Karen, if we got time for questions, if you do.
I'm trying to be the keeper of time to make sure we do have time for questions.
We're all right.
So, thank you so much. What a wonderful and impressive way for you to share your experience of how to put value in listening, in building relationships, and just the power of listening, I think we can see here on stage. So thank you for modeling that for us. I have some of the most stupendous students ready to bring question cards to anybody who have questions, and they're going to bring them to me. So if you have a question, you remember the protocol. Anybody out here have questions? We can get a card to you so fast. I don't know if I mentioned, but these students also happen to be Olympic runners. They're so fast. You know, I was listening to the presentation, and one of the things that was coming to mind for me is that Ellie Wiesel comment about how this isn't a place that has answers, this is the place for questions. And often those questions are of ourselves. When we leave this space, what are the commitments we're going to make to ourselves and to each other in order to be a better Bloomfield? So, this was on my mind as do I have a question card coming? There's a part of me that wonders if my students are doing this to me on purpose. The awkward pause. So the question that's being asked is, have your opinions ever changed over time?
Oh, yes. Every day. I mean, it's an ongoing process. I would hate to think that either one of us have locked in positions and held them the rest of our lives. I mean, conditions change and environments change, and you grow as people and learn as people. I read some of the columns I wrote 20 years ago, and I'm like, ugh. I hope nobody digs that one out. So yeah, I hope you're changing all the time. And you have core beliefs that are going to hold, and maybe even those shift. But we find when we do breakout sessions, we have people talk about themselves. Very often they'll say, well, I started out as a young person, in this party or holding these beliefs, and then I've shifted over time here, and now I'm here. Yeah, you'll shift if you're a thinking person. You'll shift throughout your life.
Well, and this is another space where I think social media is kind of confounding, right? There's this kind of gotcha atmosphere there where if you admit that, hey, I thought this yesterday, but today I'm thinking a little differently about it, or I learned something that I didn't know and I want to talk about it. People call you a hypocrite, or you're dismissed. In fact, Ta-Nehisi Coates, who's a really great writer and a thinker, quit social media about 10 years ago because he said there was no space for thought, there was no space for reconsideration on social media, and that's not healthy. I mean, it's not how the human mind or the human condition works. We all learn and grow and sometimes reconsider what we said or what we thought. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, one thing that's true, though, between the two of us is I don't think either of us has ever convinced the other that we were right? Like, I never have gotten Nolan to change his mind and agree with me on something that we disagreed with, and I think vice versa. Certainly we learn from each other, and I think would both say that our opinions are made better by knowing what the other one thinks, but I don't think neither of us ever won an argument and gotten the other to say, no, I was wrong about that.
Thank you. So, I just want you to know they don't clap in the classroom for me.
I thought that was for you.
So, here's a request that's acknowledging your main form of media is newsprint, radio as well. Being in that media universe and watching cable news and how that's been changing the way that we engage in discourse, can you share one positive and one negative that you've been seeing coming out of cable news?
Yeah, we didn't talk much about cable news this time. Normally it's a pretty big part of the presentation because and it comes up when we talk about the forces that push back against the kind of things that we're talking about. The 24-hour news cycle, which is now almost 40 years old, when Ted Turner first decided to start a news network that was never going to go off the air and was going to have news all the time, was a revolution in information sharing, right? It leads to all of these ways that we can get information about the news or about culture or about entertainment 24 hours a day. And now it's not just cable news, it's everywhere, right? It's right here on my phone, right? I don't have to go anywhere at all to find it. And I think that's a positive. I think a really powerful negative is that the approach to cable news right now, the approach to the 24-hour news cycle, is this false urgency that gets assigned to everything, and a false dichotomy that gets assigned to everything. The false urgency is this notion that everything in the world falls into the category of breaking news. If I turn on CNN right now, what will it say in what we call the lower third, which is that little streamer that goes across the bottom of the screen? It'll say breaking news. How is it possible that there's breaking news all day, every day? I mean, it doesn't even make sense. But what it's designed to do is to make you think that whatever is happening has extra importance, that everything is riding on what they're telling you is happening. And that leads us, I think, to this brinksmanship kind of thinking and approach to everything that leads us to these very hard positions and the fear of what's on the other side of that position. And then they add to that with these, a lot of the day now on cable news is not about news, because there's really not news 24 hours a day. It's discussion about news, it's debate about news, and they put together these panels, and how are the panels configured? One side versus the other side. I've got Republicans over here, I've got Democrats over here, I've got this religion here, I've got that religion there, and the idea is that they're supposed to be opposed, they're supposed to slug it out. Those things tell us over and over, and they condition us to believe that that's the way we have to think things through, that's the way we have to solve problems, and that leads us to the incivility, I think, that we have. And of course, social media, as we were already talking about, adds to that. It aggravates all of those dynamics and makes us really anxious. Again, I don't think there's anything wrong, quote unquote, with any of that. It's fine. It's what that media does. But I think you have to be conscious of it, and you have to say that there are times when we need to step away from that kind of thinking and get to a place where we're more open to the idea that there are more ways to think about things, that there are other people who feel just as strongly about what they believe as we do, and that doesn't make them bad or evil or a threat.
I think there's obvious value and a positive in access to information. We have greater access to information from so many different sources today than we ever had. But I also think it's a reminder, cable television in particular, it's a very important reminder to us that there are institutions, entities out there that profit greatly from keeping us divided and sort of promulgating this politics of fear. And too much of our politics today is about making us afraid of each other. I don't know that it's healthy sitting hour after hour in front of a screen with a cable news show on, stoking that fear and sort of affirming our own assumptions we have about the other side. I think it'd be healthier to take a break once in a while. Watch Wheel of Fortune, watch Jeopardy, do something to, remove yourself from that screen, because we have people out there who are watching these shows hour after hour after hour and buying into the conspiracy theories they promote. And that's on both sides of the political spectrum. I think it's just not healthy to stay that agitated all the time.
I'm going to ask just two more questions because I can read an audience and I see in all of your eyes, I can't wait for the goldfish. And I want to sign the Civility Project and take selfies with our elected officials. I think I'm reading the audience correctly. This next question, though, is actually a pretty difficult question.
Okay.
So the question that's being asked is, it's easy to talk about agreeing to disagree and accepting things as opinions. What happens and how do you deal with the situation with a person when the opinions that they hold are actively causing you harm or threaten your safety?
Do you want to go first, or you want me?
Yeah, no, I'll take that first. First, I think you have to make a honest assessment. Are there opinions really causing you harm and threatening your safety, or are they just making you uncomfortable? I think you need to establish that first. I mentioned earlier that we get the question all the time. How do you deal with somebody who's just won't accept the truth or won't accept the facts? And one of the ways you can engage productively with someone whom you feel that way about is to draw them out, ask questions. What do you believe? Why do you believe that way? Where did you get that information? What's the basis for that opinion? There is no value and no productivity in screaming at them or lecturing them, or even in, walking away. Engaging that back and forth, because we find that if you start asking folks questions, it tones down the conversation a little. It tones down the hostility in the conversation.
I usually at some point in this presentation talk about the limitations of what we're talking about, and any theory or any practice has limitations. It doesn't work in every situation. It doesn't work for everybody. This is an example, this question, of one of the limitations. I mean, there are people who are not interested in civil exchange, who do mean harm to other people. There are forces in our society which was founded in inequality that want to maintain those inequalities and will fight really hard to make sure that they stay in place. And I don't think anybody has an obligation to countenance any of that. You have a right to all the rights and dignities that everybody else does in this culture. And there are some times when you find yourself in a conversation or a situation with somebody who doesn't also believe that, and you don't have an obligation to just put up with that. At the same time, I also say that we are in an era when we over-assign, I think, that kind of thinking or that kind of threat to people, and we do it instinctively, we do it reflexively. This person disagrees with me, so I know they don't respect me. Or this person disagrees with me, I know they don't believe I should have the same rights that they do. I think what we're asking people to do is pause before you do that. Give that person, more of a chance to show who they are, and on your side, spend more energy trying to explore what is it that you're really saying, what is it that you really believe, and are you really a threat to me? Some of the things that we've been talking about, social media, cable news, are designed to make us see those threats in every possible place, and they don't necessarily exist there. I think we've got to be able to assess that in a really different way and approach people who disagree with us with a degree of openness that allows for that disagreement without those threats. That's difficult, and it does, I think, often make us uncomfortable. And again, we live in an era when those threats are real. And so that's not a criticism that somehow it's difficult or that we feel uncomfortable, but it is, I think, an aspiration that I'm expressing to say, pause before you jump there. There are fewer people who are actually like that than I think most of us assume there are.
So this is the question that actually made me realize that I have to honor your time as the helpers and the brilliant minds that you are in the room, because this itself is an opportunity when we go out into the commons and you're going to sit down with other people and try to be conscious about where you're sitting, to sit with people that you don't normally talk to. This is going to be the first opportunity. But aside from an event like this, the question was, how do you create the opportunity to have the meaningful discussions?
Well, I think those opportunities crop up every day, and I think the opportunity is more common and frequent to have that opportunity than it is, than we take advantage of. I think we avoid those opportunities more often than we seize them. But I mean, as you're going through your day, and as you're in the various places you go to each day, you're going to come across people you might be curious about, who you realize are different from you, don't hold the same beliefs as you, engage. I mean, the opportunities to engage are always there if you take them and if you're interested in other people.
You know, I always talk about acting where you have agency, acting in places where you actually have membership and some say over what happens. I mean, we were talking earlier about families and the difficulty that people are having inside their families managing these kind of things. That's a place that it's a great place to start thinking about these things. Is there someone in your family that you have not been able to talk to about politics because of this kind of disagreement and the inability to figure out how to configure that space? You know, school communities, right? School communities are really intimate spaces. You spend a lot of time with the people you go to school with or who you work with in school. That's a place that you have agency and the ability, I think, to command equal footing in an exchange with somebody who you disagree with. Our religious communities, our neighborhoods, it's the close-in spaces that are being damaged, I think, by the political divide, and they're places that shouldn't be. They're places where these things should be easier to manage. I think that's the best place to start. You know, I think there's a lot of frustration right now that most of us feel when we do things like watch cable television and see something happening in another part of the country or in Washington that we don't have any control over and no means to exert any control. We can't do anything about those things. What we can fix are the places where we spend our time and the people who we spend our time with. You think about those communities and the opportunity to build a better way to talk about political difference. I also say we've got a lot of public officials here tonight. These are people with a lot of decision-making power, but they also have a lot of opportunity and a lot of access to be able to frame the space for ordinary people to come together to talk about differences, to be able to have discussions about who we are and what we believe and why. Put pressure on them to do more of that, to create those spaces and invite you into them so that they can, so that you can participate in this kind of thing. But there again, it's about the close in, I think, that we're talking about, not the far away.
And Steve mentioned, you know, politics and our political leaders. A few years ago, we offered or were asked to do this for some of the new legislatures as they were coming in. It never come off the ground because one of the legislative leaders said, I don't want them talking to each other. I don't want them talking across the aisle. I won't be able to keep them in line if they do that. You know, he was worried that they get along too well and talk too much.
Thank you so much. Round of applause.